Well, welcome everyone here to the book discussion. We're going to be talking about Allegiance, Fort Sumter, Charleston, and the beginning of the Civil War. This is written by David Detzer. Going to be doing this one chapter at a time. So let's just get right into it, okay? Chapter 1. So this is kind of our introduction into just the town of Charleston. It's crazy. The American Civil War is a super cool, super crazy story. Honestly, and the more you get into it, the more you get into it. So, chapter 1 here, beginning of the war, okay? Now, this is, I would recommend doing all the research leading up to the war, doing some deep dive into that, go back into Bleeding Kansas and Missouri, all that stuff, the Missouri Compromise. It's important, and it helps understand. The farther you go back, the more you can understand. Just like today. And that's the point of going through this history stuff is the more that you go back, the more you can start to make sense of things that are happening around you today. Because, spoiler alert, guys, history kind of repeats itself. It might take a different form and look a little different, but it's kind of the same cycles that we go through. So it's important to understand this stuff, I think. But, okay, enough yapping. Chapter 1. Chapter is called Asunder. Okay, now asunder, I looked up this definition, as I do many times when I'm reading a book. I have to look up a lot of words. I'm not going to lie. So asunder, which means a definition is just apart or divided. Okay, apart or divided. Okay, remember we're talking about the Confederacy divided from the Union, or just the Union divided. Okay, so we get right into it. We're introduced to Major Robert Anderson. Okay, now this guy is put into the middle of this. He's put in the middle of, this is the first real Americans firing. Well, of the Civil War, this is the first instance of Americans firing on Americans. And you got Major Robert Anderson here, who is kind of just put in the middle of this, and he's like, hey guys, he's phoning up to Washington. Hey guys, it's getting a little hot down here. You got any, what do you want me to do? Because this guy, he's gonna do his job. He does good work. He's been a good member of the military. So he's not just gonna give up a fort if, a bunch of Charlestonians try and storm it. And at the same time, no one wants to shoot and fire back on other Americans. So it's a heck of a spot to be in, if you ask me. And that's what really turned me on to this particular story. But so Major Anderson, he comes to replace Colonel John L. Gardner at Fort Moultrie. Okay, so Fort Moultrie, different fort than Fort Sumter. We'll kind of get into that a little later, but Fort Moultrie, it's in the same area, same town, really. They're all in this little bay of Charleston. Okay, so let's talk about the town of Charleston, and that's mostly what this chapter covers. Town of Charleston, population is 50,000. Half the population is black. Okay, so population of 50,000, half the population is black, African American. It's described as an exotic town. So to me, what that says to me is probably, if you could think of a tourist town, or if you guys have ever been to like Gatlinburg, Tennessee or something, I would describe Gatlinburg as maybe kind of exotic, Pigeon Forge. You got Dolly World down there, so it's just kind of it's a town like that. It's an interesting town, a town that sounds like it has a lot of personality. Okay, so the economy for this town is supported by commerce. Okay, like I said, the town is a bay. It's on the sea, and you got lots of stuff coming in, right? You have, the southern economy they were supplying basically most of the cotton, if not all the cotton, a very high percentage of the cotton to the world at that time. Lots of goods going in and out of the East Coast there, along the southeast coast. So you've got these 19 what are called WHARVES, all right, on on the bay there, wharves, WHARVES. Now these are basically just ship loading areas. Okay, think about if you have a semi-loading dock. This is a similar thing, except for big ships that are carrying goods. That was also another word I had to look up in the dictionary. But so you have these 19 wharves that are, I mean, you have 2 to 3 miles of these basically ship cargo loading areas right there in Charleston. So it's you know, like I said, it goes back to being an exotic town. You've got a town supported by, you know, things coming and going. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily, you know, back inland a little bit where you might, you know, same old thing. You're on a, you know, a farm or whatever, you know, just rowing fields or whatever. And the same old thing, you got ships coming and going, and that's what your economy depends on. So, you know, it's an interesting little spot there in the South in Charleston. So now we're talking about just the people that kind of live there. Okay, so it talks about the houses. The houses in Charleston are built in a way so that the back of the house is at the street. Okay, so your front door is not on the street. You go through if you're walking down the street, you're going to be walking along people's little courtyards, which you would enter a little courtyard, then walk to the front of the house. Okay, now this was set up this way because it talks about how people had a focus on life enjoyment. So people that were living in Charleston were, you know, they were not poor people. Well, I mean, what we're talking about now, we're talking about upper class people that have plenty of money. They just want to, you know, sit in private, away from the street. You know, no one bother them. No one walk around along the street looking up in their windows. They're just be able to look out their balcony, look out over the ocean, look out into the bay and all that stuff. And, you know, that's kind of, I guess that's kind of the vibe there in Charleston. That's the vibe, all right? What you want to call it. On the inverse, some parts of the city there, they're talking about how they literally smell because you got, you know, I figure it's like any other city. You go down any city, I know if I go downtown here, you got really nice houses, and then it's like just all of a sudden it's polar opposite. You know what I'm saying? You got boarded up stuff, and then the next block you got basically mansions. That's kind of what it sounds like here. You got these super fancy houses, these people that are, you know, eating their little tea and crumpets and stuff, not even wanting to look at people on the street, just having a good old little time. And then you go down a couple blocks and you got people chasing chicken around and, you know, chasing chickens around, and it smells like a dang barn. You know what I mean? So that's kind of what my take was there. So now we're going to talk about what's referred to as the free black population. Okay, so there's freed blacks. There's about 3,200 freed blacks in Charleston at the time. Okay, now they're free. I mean, some of them are freed. You know, it talks about how some of them would just kind of age out, I guess, and you know, some of them would. Well, I'll talk about more in a second. But you have this population of freed blacks. And within that population, the free black population, remember this is in South Carolina, which South Carolina, first state to secede from the Union. Okay, so just, you know, to kind of help put everything together, South Carolina, first state to secede from the Union. Within the free black population in Charleston, you have an elite class of free blacks. So just like within, you know, I think within every subset of culture, you know what I mean? It all seems to come back to there's classes. The people seem to develop their own little classes. And then within those classes, there's classes, you know? So we're talking about what's referred to as the brown elite, which is a subset of class in the free blacks. And these are people that would, like we said, these are free black people that would, ride down the street and they'd be all fancied up like the people we were just talking about that like to, eat their, drink tea and eat crumpets and all that kind of stuff. And they'd be strolling down the street or riding in a nice carriage and all that stuff. And then you have instances of, regular kind of, blue collar guy that might, like a construction worker. You have a construction worker that's eyeing these, what they would call the brown elite class roll by them on a fancy carriage. So it's just an interesting picture. You know what I'm saying? It's not necessarily something that you picture probably if you picture slavery in the South. So it's just, like I said, this is just interesting stuff to help kind of put this stuff into context. It's just interesting. So yeah, you've got the brown elite class, which are even, by my take, resented for their wealth and status by, like I said, your standard white construction worker or whatever, watching them ride by in a fancy carriage and all that stuff. So, interesting little bullet point there. Also, now here's something that's I thought was really crazy. In Charleston, okay, you have 131 slave-owning African Americans. 131 African Americans that owned slaves. Okay, so that's, like I said, that's I don't know. That's just something that I guess you don't normally probably associate or you normally don't expect to hear when you're talking about slavery in the South and the Civil War. You have 131 slave-owning African Americans in Charleston at the time. So, like I said, it seems like it goes back, as that tree gets bigger, it's just the subsets of culture seem to have their own little hierarchies that develop within them. Even as much as, back in the day, a slave class emerging amongst a free slave population. So, that's I don't know. You know what I mean? So let's go to, okay, we're talking more about the freed black population. It goes on for a couple paragraphs on this, just some interesting stuff. So this is where stuff starts getting crazy. So you got a guy, this is a freed black man. His name is James D. Johnson. Okay. He's a tailor. He's he does business with wealthy families. Okay. All the wealthy families in the area, they know him. They like him. Jim Johnson, they say, James D. Johnson, they say, you gotta, you're good with me. You're good to go. Good guy. Does, he probably interacts more with wealthy white people than anyone else. It even describes that he had it says little to no contact nor sympathy for slaves. Okay. So this is a freed black man who's kind of hanging out with the rich white class in Charleston, who described as he doesn't really interact with slaves and he really doesn't feel sympathy for them. Okay. How that pans out, I don't know. You know what I mean? It's so like I said, the way this book opens up in this first chapter is crazy to me. So much stuff that I'd never heard before, or at least not in this much detail. But this is where stuff starts getting crazy. Okay, so now we're talking about the freed blacks. I'm using quotations there if you're just watching. I'm using air quotes, freed blacks, because they do have some rules that the local police, put on. They're not allowed to stroll the Battery. Okay, now the Battery, this is something I had to do some research on. The Battery is basically just a big seawall that goes, it's a wall that's built along the coast where they have a bunch of basically cannons. So if someone tries to invade the coast, they have this wall, this fortified wall that they can fight from, and shoot cannons and all that kind of stuff. And it made a nice little kind of boardwalk kind of deal. You go and stroll the battery on a Friday night, Saturday night, or whatever. Pop onto the little tavern maybe, and then take a nice little night stroll on the battery there. Well, the freed black population wasn't allowed to do that. So, how free really are they? Well, I guess they're, for the time, they were free, but by all standards, I would say they're still not free. They also had rules, and they're making these rules because as tensions are getting kind of high and building up to the war, we're talking Abraham Lincoln was just elected, not inaugurated yet, but elected. Once he was elected, that was, and right up to that, there was, just like anything else, around a presidential election, you got people, you go on, YouTube here, you go anywhere, you go on, and there's people trying to get everyone fired up, saying, if this guy gets elected, it's going to be the end of the world or whatever. It was the same kind of deal back then, guys. Same kind of deal back then. People in the South were saying, if Lincoln gets elected, they were basically going, if Lincoln gets elected, I'm going to kill myself. You know what I'm saying? It was crazy. Okay. People are just not digging the idea of Abraham Lincoln being elected. And so now they've got these rumors going around that abolitionists from up north are coming down to the South and just riling people up. So abolitionists, people that are vehemently anti-slavery, right? Like they're not just like, yeah, I'll fight against slavery because I live in the North, or yeah, I'm indifferent. No, these are people that were like, we got to get rid of slavery. We're going on a mission. We're getting rid of slavery. There's really no evidence of what these people are talking about in Charleston, but it describes, basically rumors going around that these abolitionists are coming down and riling up the slaves and basically trying to cause a revolt and all this stuff. And so this causes, we're talking pitchforks and torches going out and finding, they end up killing a guy and his wife, a white guy and his wife, accusing them of, it was kind of one of those, hangman's, jury where they catch him out on the trail and they don't really have much evidence, but they accuse him of being part of some abolitionist mercenary crew, and they end up killing these people. So stuff is crazy. So they start making rules for the free blacks because they think the abolitionists are coming down and riling up the free blacks. Okay, it's insane. It's the same thing. It's someone in whatever Twitter was, the little newspaper. Someone was on Twitter in Charleston, and just getting fired up on some tweets or whatever. And they're making these ridiculous rules for the, again, air quote, free blacks in the area. They can't stroll the battery. You know what I'm saying? What is that all about? And these are, like we described above with old Jim Johnson up there, people are just doing business with these guys like normal. They're buying shoes from him, whatever. The freed black population is just running normal businesses in the town. Okay, and they're making rules saying they can't walk on the boardwalk. You know what I'm saying? There's a couple rules here. They made a rule that they couldn't gather in groups of 7 or more without a responsible white. Let me read that again. They made a rule in Charleston that the freed black population, that that the free blacks could not gather in groups of 7 or more without a responsible white. You know what I mean? I mean, what is that? Oh, it's crazy. I'm not laughing at it, you guys. It's just it's insane to think about. Okay, you know. And like I said, this is just due to people riling people up for no reason. They talk about how some of these rules were kind of seldom enforced. So it kind of sounds like you had some people that were really fired up making the rules. Some people went along with the rules, but most people really weren't going to enforce the rules. Okay. Because like I said, like Jim Johnson, you know, your guy who you've been getting who's been tailoring all your stuff for who knows how long, you're going to catch him walking out with his wife down the Battery one night, and you're just going to pop, hey, Jim, why, time to head inside. No, you're not going to do that. Not to old Jim. That's kind of my take, is like anything else, you've got some people that are, you know, rousing everyone up with these rumors, and then probably most of the population really wasn't really into it. You know, but I don't know. That's kind of my interpretation there. So restricted education, restrictions on medical facilities, still, you know, not the greatest circumstances for. So now we're talking mid-August of 1860, right? We're in the final run leading up to the election that is ultimately going to elect Abraham Lincoln as president. So now the freed black population has to show paperwork of freedom, okay? So now they're asking them to show paperwork, you know, hey, show us paperwork that you're free, you know? And a lot of these guys are like, what are you talking about, man? I've been free for, you know, freaking 25 years now. No. We just ate dinner together like the other night. What do you mean I need to show you paperwork? So that's what we're back into. We got guys running around the streets, probably a small group of, you know, some guys who spent too much time on Twitter running around and asking black people for paperwork. That's kind of what I'm taking there. Just insane. Not, like I said, not good stuff. Okay, so now let's talk about this. Some of the slaves in this area were, I think, when you commonly think of slaves, you probably think of like a bunkhouse on a plantation, out in a field, you know, the guys with, you know, shortcut pants and all that kind of stuff. So here we're talking about someone might just own 1 or 2 slaves, and they'll just find them a job down the street and then say, hey, I got you a job. This is, you know, their white owner would send their slave to work a job, and then the slave would have to bring their paycheck and give it to the owner. So you guys think taxes are bad. Imagine giving your whole check to some guy. You know what I mean? That wouldn't be good. Some slaves would have little side gigs. They do for a little cash. You know what I mean? Little cash money on the side, and be able to buy their family cool stuff, buy their kids nice stuff. And now let's talk about curfews, okay? So curfews, this is more rules for the freed black population. You have curfews where you literally got a guy that'll beat a drum outside the police station at like 9 or 10 o'clock, whenever curfew's gonna be. They'll give the 10-minute warning, and this is a guy just beating the little drum outside the police station, saying 10 minutes, all the black people have to be inside, okay? So, I mean, I can't imagine. That's crazy to imagine a world like that, you know what I mean? But that's kind of what was going down in Charleston, all right? So then they'd beat the drum again after 10 minutes saying, all right, final call. Y'all need to be inside, you know. I mean, imagine that. Imagine as an adult, you hear a drum and you know you have to be inside. Or this, what's called the Vigilance Committee, would go around, and so then after that drum was beat and you had to go inside, then you had these guys that wanted to enforce the rules. And like you said, we had some guys that probably didn't care about this at all. And then you had some guys like this Vigilance Committee who they were like, no, I'm going to go ride the streets and make sure they did go back inside. All right. So then you hear, let's say you're a 50-year-old man, you're a 50-year-old black man, you're outside, I don't know, just being outside as some humans do. And you hear the little drum beat, and then you have to go inside, and then you hear this vigilance committee or whatever clip-clopping, down the street on their horses, checking to make sure you're inside. I mean, that's got to be, I can't even imagine. You know what I'm saying? I can't even imagine. I mean, we saw what was happening when we were told to stay inside, how crazy that was. I mean, and that was nothing compared to, I would say, something like that. So, yikes, this stuff is just crazy. So now we're talking about going back to people are losing their minds because they know Lincoln's going to get elected. At this point, it's pretty clear that he's going to get elected, okay? They know it's coming. They're not happy. You've got rules. You got drummers. You got guys on horseback making sure black people are inside by 10 p.m. It's a pretty crazy scene in Charleston, okay? So here's a quote. So this is a quote of a white person in Charleston. Say, we do not want to be murdered in cold blood because we own slaves. We do not want to be murdered in cold blood because we own slaves. Okay? So that's, that's the mindset of some of these people back then. Saying, I don't want to be killed just because I own a slave, because I own some slaves. It's crazy how it cannot. It just seemed to me like slavery was just I don't know. I can't. Like I said, I can't. It's just trying to imagine. It just seemed like just another class of people back then, where people just didn't think twice. I mean, obviously some people didn't think twice. Abraham Lincoln definitely, had some of his own thoughts about slavery. So, yeah, we do not want to be murdered in cold blood because we own slaves. Okay, so that's kind of the people that we got in Charleston. Some of them, not all of them. I'm just saying that was, to help put things in context. There was, they were under the notion that the North was going to destroy them once Lincoln was elected. All right, so they're saying once Abraham Lincoln is elected, he's going to come through and it's all over for us down south. They're not happy. And like I said, you got the vigilance committee, these small little groups that are forming up, going around enforcing, these laws. Or, well, just not laws, these local, ordinances that they have against the free black population. Even guys like Jim Anderson, who we talked about, kind of a wealthy free black, in pretty good with all the, rich families in the area. They even come knocking on his door asking for papers, saying, and he's like, are you kidding me? What are you talking about? What do you mean my free papers? Which I assume some of them were probably like, I don't know where that is. I mean, think about today. How many times have you lost, I don't know, your debit card? You know what I'm saying? How many of you don't know where your birth certificate is right now? I mean, come on. So now here we got an instance. Now this is November 7th, which, as you may know, is the day after the election of Abraham Lincoln. Okay, he's elected. November 6th. Okay. Abraham Lincoln is elected. November 7th, court is in session down in South Carolina. You've got this Judge Andrew Gordon McGrath who's holding court. He's holding court up there with his, his gavel. And he gets news. Some guy probably, I'm sure, dramatically runs in the courtroom and goes, Lincoln was elected. And basically this judge goes, well, I'm out. This guy just quits. He quits. And he says, as long as Lincoln is elected, there's no point. All right. So people just walk out of the courtroom. And so, you know what I mean? That's the kind of stuff we were dealing with down there. So you've got a Captain Barry here of just a steamship coming in the port. He takes down the American flag that's on his ship and puts up a South Carolina state flag, which I guess he had custom sewed in the past. So he'd probably been just itching to hoist that thing. You know what I'm saying? And he got his chance. He took down his American flag and put up the South Carolina state flag. Okay? The South Carolina flag has 15 stars because there were 15 slave states. Alrighty? The South. Kind of referred to as slave states and free states back then. Despite, there was a lot of other things, not just slavery, that is amping up this war. But ultimately, we are calling states free states and slave states. When a state is added to the Union, Missouri, you know what I'm saying? We're arguing over, what was the Missouri Compromise? It was arguing over whether it could be a free state or a slave state, okay? So there's a lot of things contributing to the war, but they all seem to kind of come full circle back to slavery. We got a lady here that lives on a plantation. She writes in a diary, I'm all for justice, but imagining being mixed with freed blacks sounds horrid. Okay? So she's saying, imagine me imagining just hanging out with these, with Papa's slaves sounds horrid to this lady. Okay, she just can't imagine that. Lincoln is now elected, all right, where once he was elected, I'm telling you, it was over. It was like when, you can imagine some other presidents getting elected, and it seemed like, it seemed like everyone lost their minds. Similar thing amplified by probably 100 or 1,000 times when Lincoln was elected, okay? And then here on October 25th, the South Carolina governor, he basically puts out a line to all the other governors in the South saying, hey, guys, we got to talk. All right, Lincoln was elected. It's not good. This is crazy. We got to get together and talk, figure out what we're going to do. No one really gets back to him, at least probably at the speed he was wanting to. So he has a little meeting within his own, government, South Carolina government, his own committees. And they decide, all right, you know what? If Lincoln gets elected, we're going to secede. All right? And secede they did. So now I'm going to read you, to go out here, the last line in this book, because remember, the man of the hour is Major Robert Anderson. Okay? He is the man. Now, we have all this crazy stuff going on in Charleston, right? Everything that we just talked about, all right? And so now this is how this chapter wraps up. This is the last line of the chapter, all right? It was this city at this moment of excitement that Major Robert Anderson entered. All right? So here he comes. I mean... What a time to walk in to be control, to walk in to be the guy that has to take control of. At the time, he probably thought it was, if you've been in the military, you get orders, you go to a duty station. It's probably maybe just another duty station to him. He probably isn't figuring that he's about to be in charge of the, he's going to be the guy at basically the first battle of the Civil War. Okay. So here he is, and that leads us to chapter 2, and we will see you guys at chapter 2. Thanks for listening and watching.